Now, on to the third piece of evolutionary evidence, which is limb structure. One of the things that we can look at is basic structure of different organisms and see how similar they are. So with vertebrates, remember those are organisms that have a backbone, like you and I. We all have a very similar arm or limb structure. So if we take a look at what we call our forelimbs, for us these are our arms. For other animals, it might be their front legs, for example, if we're talking about different vertebrates. And our limb structure can show us how there have been evolutionary changes gradually over time. Now again, remember that it's not going to be very quick. My offspring aren't going to sprout wings in the next generation, but this is going to be, we're talking about generally millions of years. So when we look at these, what we find is the more related two organisms are, the more characteristics they are going to share. Now we look at characteristics in a few different ways. What we take a look at is we look at how those characteristics, while similar, have adapted to different environments. So we have first what we call homologous structures. And the term HOMO, what that means is similar. So these are similar structures that come from an evolutionary common ancestor. So if we take a look at this screen here, what we see are the forelimbs of different vertebrates. Now, take a look at all of these different ones. You can see four categories. We have flying, we have swimming, we have running, and we have grasping. And we would fall into this category, also like a shrew or a monkey who uses their hands like we do. We're all going to have the same similar forelimb structure. We start out with our humerus, our radius, and our ulna. Our carpals are our wrist, our metacarpals are in our hand, and our phalanges are our fingers. Now, a big difference you can see, like for example, between a human where we have phalanges, their phalanges have changed into a hoof for walking around. You can imagine if you're pounding down on the ground, you wouldn't want to walk around on your fingertips. That would hurt your fingers over time. So we see that based on the environment, a hoof is favored by a sheep, for example. You can also see how spread out in something like a bat that the phalanges and the metacarpals are. They're very long, and also it's kind of interesting that the bone structure is quite different in a bat or in a bird. They have hollow bones. They have a lot of holes in their bones to make their bones lighter so that they can lift up their bodies while they're flying. So a lot of similarities in the structure here. These are homologous structures. Now, we might have structures that have no current apparent purpose, but they do show evolutionary relationships. What we call those is we call those vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are something like hip bones for many animals. So we have hip bones. Now let's think about our hips. Our hips are used to hold up our legs, right? So our legs are connected there. So they have an important purpose. Or if we look at something like a salamander, you can see the salamander, like us, has hips and the legs are supported by the hips. Now, two other animals that have hip bones but don't have legs are something like the baleen whale or big giant whales in the ocean. You don't see them swimming around with their legs. Legs would cause them to drag and go much slower, so that wouldn't be selected for in that environment. And the other thing that you can see in a snake is you can see small hip bones, but again, no legs. What that tells us is that maybe millions of years ago that the whale and the snake used to have legs. Now they have had that selected for to be more streamlined, right? A snake is going to kind of curve around on the ground, and a whale is going to do the same in the ocean. So they want that drag on land for snakes or in the ocean for the whales. For us, a vestigial structure are our wisdom teeth. These are teeth that we don't need anymore, and they're actually hurt us if we don't get them out. This is a pretty neat picture because you can see the wisdom teeth are pushing on the other teeth. This could really, if you don't get these unnecessary teeth out at some point in your life, they could mess up the structure of your entire jaw, and they could make all of your teeth come forward. So that wouldn't be very beneficial. But what that tells us is that at some point we had an ancestor that needed teeth way, way, way back there. Now, the last piece of structure that I want to talk about are called analogous structures. Analogous structures are structures that are similar between unrelated organisms. So if we take a look at these, what they show is that there is no common ancestor between two organisms. So what they're showing, and this is kind of a mind-blowing thing, is they're showing convergent evolution. What that means is that these two organisms who are not related are starting to evolve toward each other. Who knows, maybe they'll merge up into one super crazy organism. So for example, when we're talking about convergent evolution, if we take a look at these two, like a dragonfly, which is an invertebrate, who does have wings, their wings have no bones, and their wings are about 2 cells thick. So we're talking about a really light organism. A bird has wings. A bird, though, has the same homologous series of bones that we have too. So we know there are bones within these wings. The wings are a lot bigger and a lot thicker in cell size. So here we have two flying organisms that are not apparently related by a very common ancestor, but they both do fly. So we call that convergent evolution, where they're emerging or evolving toward one another. So here I have a question for you. If we take a look at this, are the forearms of a seal and a penguin homologous, vestigial, or analogous? Now, if you don't know, let me give you a little hint that both of these are vertebrates, so that maybe will give the answer away. So let's apply the vocabulary, and what you would know then is both of these, like you and I, they're going to have the same four-limb structure, so they are one, homologous. The next piece of evolution that I want to talk about is skull structure. So a few things. If we look at one of our very common ancestors, which is the modern gorilla and the human, we are closely related. We do share a common ancestor. We can see some differences in the environments that we live in and how we have adapted. So if we take a look at going from apes to humans, we will see that if we take a look at the jaw sizes. So I've got some skeletons here too, that you can see that with their jaw sizes, that we have quite a small jaw here, and that the gorilla has quite a large jaw. Also take a look at the teeth. Look at the teeth of the gorilla. Quite large canines, as opposed to humans, we don't have very large canines. So there's a big difference in the environments that they live in. We don't typically go out and run after and catch our food every day, so we don't need these big jaws. A lot of us drive up and get our food. For them, they have to chase after their food, so they're going to need this big, strong jaw and big teeth to get their food. So you can see a difference there. The other thing, too, is we take a look at the flatness of the human face. Our face is pretty flat. Now, take a look at the gorilla. The gorilla has this very large protruding jaw. It really comes out to support, again, this large jawbone and this whole snout that has all these teeth. So we see a big difference there. Now, one of the things that we also see, if you feel on your head, we do have a flat head. Feel right here above your eyebrows. We don't have what we call a brow ridge. You might feel a teeny bit of a ridge there. And you can see that in this skull. There's a little tiny bit of a ridge at the eyebrows. But if you take a look at the gorilla, they have quite a large ridge. So a big difference in skull structure there. There's a larger forehead in humans, right? There's not much of a forehead going from the brow ridge to the skull or the brain cavity here. You don't really see much. But if you take a look at the human skull, we have a really large forehead. Now, one other thing that I want to mention, I always think that this is kind of the most mind-blowing thing in looking at the difference between a human skull and a gorilla skull. Look at the size of our brain cavity. Our brain takes up a lot of real estate in our skull. Now take a look at this skull. While it's quite large, it only has a very small amount of real estate in comparison to the mouth. So we see quite a difference. That's why we say humans are much smarter or highly evolved than our ape ancestors.